All right. Hello, everybody. I see a couple more joining now, but we can go ahead and get kicked off. Welcome, everyone, to July's edition of the Denver Department of Transportation Infrastructure Advisory Board meeting. We always start off with our roll call and approval of the previous meeting's minutes. So I'll pull up our attendance sheet right now, start working through that. If we have a couple late joiners, I can mark them down a little bit later. So I'll start at the top of their list and call out folks who asked for an excused absence in advance of this meeting. So to begin with, I know the addition's not quite official yet, but Joni, I see you're here. You'll be the top of the list going forward. Last name starts with A. So we have Joni on the line here. Lucia, are you here today?
Here.
Yes, hello. Alicia? I thought I saw Alicia join, but perhaps
you did. I'm here. I'm right here. Hi.
All right. Ian?
Here.
Yes. Jake?
Here.
Alan?
Here.
Paul? I know Paul's on. He was talking to us. There he is. There he is. Okay. Oh, and I missed over here. Brian Carroll couldn't join this month, nor could Christopher Johnson. So Gary Johnson.
I'm present.
Hello, hello. Joe, I didn't see Joe join. No, looks like he's not with us. Jaime?
Jamie, here.
Oh, sorry, Jamie, yeah.
That's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. For some reason, I thought you pronounced your name Jaime. Someone introduced you as that recently, and I was like, oh, I'll just pick that up. But okay, Jamie, hello. Aileen? No. Kurt? And Chris Pacheco, also a no. And Julie had excused herself, as did Tanger. I think we've got a couple of summer vacations going on this month. So that closes roll call, and I just want to do the quick math here to make sure we have quorum for today. Okay, so interesting. I'm just trying to redo the math here. We determined last month that quorum is dependent on the number of folks who are officially on the roster. Technically, Ian, Joni, and Gary are not officially on the roster, so we should be doing the math out of a sum, out of a denominator of a reduced team here. And so I'm trying to count up who we have that is part of the quorum count. Let's see, 1, 2.
So the denominator is 15.
Out of 15, okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I think our bar is 60%, or is it 75? I'm forgetting.
I think it's 60.
60, okay, 1. I actually think we're under, unfortunately, unless more folks join. Oh wait, here's Joe coming along. I'll still redo that math, but we might be under quorum. I don't know that any of our agenda, well, the elections were a decision-making element, but the rest of the agenda, I don't believe is. So we can at least perform most of our agenda with the current count of folks. I will sort of rerun the numbers as we go to see if we
Jake just joined too.
Jake was already on.
Was he on counted?
I think video just came on. So let's see, out of 15, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, we only have 8 out of 15. So I think that puts us under for now. Barely, yeah. So if we have someone else join us along the way, we'll be able to complete the vote. If not, we'll have to bump that to another month. In the meantime, I will send out a link in our chat here for the June minutes. Want to call a vote momentarily to approve. Oh, sorry. Jake, I think you have your hand up here.
What do?
Are you on camera?
Yeah.
Joe, I think you're muted. But I was curious at what point. I do know we have bylaw rules around attendance to kind of prevent these kind of quorum issues. I was wondering if we need to, potentially start exploring those. It wouldn't be my first choice, but was curious about that.
Yep. So I've been tracking. we have no individual person has hit that number of like, we need to investigate options around seeing if we need to find a replacement, something along those lines. We just happen to have a lot in these last 2 months as we hit summer, but it's not consistent. It's different people.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah. I'm just realizing though, I just said we didn't hit quorum. We also can't approve the minutes without quorum. So I'll need to skip that part of the agenda unless we see anyone join midway through this call here. So we'll move on from that. Briefly would love to then move us on to the introduction of our new DOTI advisory board members. We'll note here that we're saying new members, we've invited them to join us, although technically this has not passed council approval. It's on next week's docket, but we don't foresee any issues with these persons being approved. So we can go ahead and assume this will move through the council. So we have 3 new board members on the line: Gary Johnson from District 2, Joni Allen from District 11, and Ian, you can help me, is it Chowdhury,
yeah.
Chowdhury, and what an at-large council appointment here. Would love to start at the top here with Gary, if you just want to give a brief introduction. Oh, I think you are muted.
The most used phrase in video conferencing, you are muted. So thank you though for that opportunity. I didn't prepare anything formal, although I have been tracking this since the charter change a year or so, year and a half ago. And I'm delighted with the opportunity to provide some input to this. I've enjoyed living in Denver for over 40 years. And I've been a consulting engineer. And I've actually held a position with the City and County of Denver Public Works Department on a bond program a number of years ago. So I feel I'm vested and I have an interesting perspective from the 40 years I've been here. Yeah. So I look forward to meeting all of you at some point personally. That's part of why I'm interested in being on this board, is to get a chance to meet all of you. So
that's really exciting. I don't know that I don't know if we have currently any engineers on the board, so it'll be lovely to get the wealth of experience from that background here.
What kind of engineering?
What kind of engineering? I'm actually a traffic engineer. I hold a certificate in the professional traffic operations engineer. And I've been doing roadway design, signal design, traffic studies, multimodal projects. Have
you read Confessions of a Recovering Engineer?
No, actually, I'm thought about writing a book. And I think the title is going to be Trust Me.
You should read this book. It's Chuck Marone, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, traffic engineer.
I'll write it down. Thank you.
Chuck Marone.
Marone.
Marohn.
Yeah, thanks, Gary, and welcome. I know we're in the middle of introductions here, but did want to note briefly that I did see Aileen, you joined us. Hello. So that does put us up to our 60% quorum. Once we finish these introductions, I'll move back to the meeting minutes. So next up here, Joni from District 11.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to thank you for allowing me to serve on such a prestigious committee. And I look forward to learning and sharing and hopefully giving back to this organization as you have given me. I was born and raised here in Denver, Colorado. So it's a total of 18 years I have. Born and raised in Denver, Colorado, total of 18 years. Come on, I don't hear any laughs, but that's okay. I tend to be a bit of a jokester. I worked at the Colorado Department of Transportation for 20 years. I'm a computer engineer. I worked in the engineering and design branch of information technology during that time. I retired in 2003. And I'm really glad to see an organization such as the DOTI coming about. We certainly needed it way back in the day, but now that we have it, we should be grateful. That's all I have to add.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. And we've got another person here with experience with the city. That's fantastic.
State. I was there
state,
for the
state.
Colorado Department of Highways.
Highways. Okay, see that. Okay. I misheard that. Thank you. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. And then Ian.
Hi, everyone. Ian Chowdhury here. Super excited to be on this board. Has been working with the city on different topics, engineer by education, and then I did my MBA. All my life, 28 years working on infrastructure and transportation projects. Lived and worked in about 12 countries. Construction, and then now program management and consulting that I started about 10 years ago. Moved here 14 years ago from Washington, DC. When my kids decided that this place is better than Maryland. So we packed and moved. So we had, since then, I've been working with RTD and City of Denver on a lot of projects. My office is in downtown Wells Fargo building, and I commute there every day. So very happy to learn and to share what we can do to improve transportation infrastructure in this city. Looking forward to it. Very, very happy to meet with you all.
Yes, welcome Ian.
What part of the city are you from, Ian?
So I just moved about 5 years ago in Centennial. We had to expand the house, so we ended up moving there. That's why I worked with Councilwoman Ortega very, very closely on all the transportation and affordable housing projects that she's looking at. So I've been working with her for a few years.
All right. Man, with everyone on the line today, as just some guy who finds this interesting, I'm feeling very under-credentialed, but here we are. All right, thank you, welcome. And over these next few meetings, I'm sure we'll have more opportunities to introduce ourselves. I don't think we reserved enough time for that today, but I'm looking forward to getting to know you all better. Next up would be public comment. We're right on time for it, but I do want to briefly move back to our June minutes. I'd move to approve the minutes from last month. Could I get a second from the board?
Second.
All right, thank you. And for approval of those minutes, any nays? And any ayes?
Aye.
Aye.
Awesome.
Aye.
Great.
Aye.
Thank you all. So moving to public comment here, Michelle let us know, for those of us who were on a little bit early, that we have one public commenter in the queue today. I believe that's David Mincer. So we have a little bit of extra time. We'd reserved about 20 minutes for public comment, and I think only have one. Do you just want to confirm, Michelle, there's no one else within the attendance group, just sort of meeting attendance group, that has signaled they were looking to comment as well? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So let me move over David and we can let him have the floor.
Yeah.
David, let us know when you've joined.
Hello,
Hey, David.
am I in?
Yes, you
in
are.
and we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm back to discuss my favorite topic, I-25 expansion. I hope you're all not sick of me yet, and I'm sure I'll be back many more times. I wanted to specifically talk about the modeling and that DOTI is using for greenhouse gas emissions on this project, and presumably will be on others. Last year, Colorado passed a law that said that transportation projects have to limit their greenhouse gas emissions, and if they go over budget, then they need to mitigate them. So it would be I was very interested to see how those models would play out, what kind of predictions they would make for a project like this. And I emailed the document earlier. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. First, they predict an increase in pedestrian and bike and transit trips that replace car trips, and presumably that's because of the sidewalks they're building and the 10-foot path they're building under the highway. But when, with the bulk of the project is widening the ramp, expanding the streets around the highway entrance, and they say they do not expect any increase in car trips due to that. So in the end, their conclusion is that they're reducing by spending 88 million on this project. They are reducing car trips, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing ozone pollution. And I just think that conclusion is it's just so dishonest, and honestly, it's such bad faith for a city that is claiming that they care about climate change. If they want to go ahead and widen this highway and widen Exposition and all the streets around it, okay, but at least admit you're going to increase driving, you're going to increase greenhouse gas emissions. So I hope that the board can kind of keep them honest and maybe dig a little deeper into how they came to these numbers. And if there's a way to kind of correct the record to say that this really doesn't square.
Okay, thank you, David. Yeah, we'll want to follow up on this. I know that you sent the board in advance of your comment the document you were referencing here,
Yep.
where those assessments and sort of conclusions were made. Definitely, from my perspective, worth looking into. I think pretty much everyone on this line is aware of the concept of induced demand. So if we're not factoring that into our calculations, I personally would find that a point of concern. Perhaps we can suggest for one of our upcoming topics. I know we have sort of an agenda to move through, but could wedge this into one of those examinations of a project, how and where these calculations are coming from that don't seem to consider the induced demand factor.
They do kind of consider induced demand for pedestrians and bicycle, that if they build a sidewalk, they might have more of those trips, and I think that's valid. But then to say we're going to reduce congestion and widen these streets, and it won't induce any demand, it won't increase driving. I just don't know how they can say that.
Yeah.
Even if they don't have a number, maybe they don't. I kind of, if you look at that document, they say they increase bicycle trips by 20 a day. I mean, I don't know how the heck they can conclude that, but at least qualitatively, we could kind of say it will increase or decrease these modes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you. I don't need your whole 20 minutes, that's for sure.
Thank you, David. Councilman Hines is over in the attendees area. He's got his hand up. Councilman, I'm going to move you over as a panelist. So you can, I don't know what, I'm just going to move you over. Let us know when you've joined.
Hey.
Welcome.
Hello. I am so excited to be here. I realized that I could catch the small bit of public comment. I am on television a lot, but it's rare for me to be an attendee. So it's interesting to see the attendee perspective. But I just wanted to say thank you for all you do. When I was inaugurated on July 15th of 2019, Marshall Zellinger brought the 5 new council members into an area, and he did an interview with all 5 new council members. He asked us, what is the biggest issue facing Denver today? And of course, this is before the pandemic. 3 people said the answer was the biggest issue was affordability. I want to share with you that I still think my answer is valid even after the pandemic, and that is, I said, it's pretty wonky. I said it's the relationship between land use and transit infrastructure. And, developers are very concerned about and rightfully so, about the plot that they're developing. But there isn't as much of a conversation about how people get to and from that plot. And so I'm so excited to see that we have an advisory board. Mr. Cohen, thank you so much for being here and representing Perfect 10. I'm also really happy that to see that I know a lot of you already. And if I don't know you, I would love to get to know you. When Director Cleckley was here, I guess he's gone, so I can call him Ulyss. I said that I wanted to be his best friend. And I have said that with Director Phipps as well, because A lot of my biggest challenges and concerns, they all require collaboration with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. And so I want to partner with you too, the advisory board, to make sure that we get what the city wants, what the people want, as far as making sure that we can get around our city. I believe strongly that we all deserve the freedom to get from A to B safely, no matter how we choose to get there. And so I just wanted to come personally as a member of the public and say, look forward to working with you. If we aren't already, I hope that we can create a renewed relationship. And if we are already, let's strengthen it. So thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you, Councilman Hines. Good to hear, and glad to have you with us today. All right. Yeah, a couple of thank yous in the chat here as well, in case you can't see those. So yeah, thanks to the team here. I think that concludes our public comment session. I know also Michelle warned us that Stephen can't join us for the shared micromobility Montpellier connector discussion until 4:40. Our only next topic on the agenda before then is a report out from DOTI leadership. So we can hop into that. And if we still need to fill a gap in time there before Stephen can join us, perhaps we can talk about the committee reports that were sent in the last month. So with that, Nick, it looks like you'll be taking this today.
Sir, thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, I probably can't vamp for 15 minutes here. So thank you for some agenda flexibility. Biggest thing I wanted to report, gosh, 2 Mondays ago, the city council approved the volume-based trash pricing, or pay as you throw. And that really, is a major shift for the city, certainly in my opinion, for the better. Very exciting, something folks have been working on for 20 years plus. On there, and really, I think gets Denver one step closer to where it needs to be. As I always said, if Longmont can do it, we certainly can do it. And that's no shot at Longmont on there, but very excited about that. One of the big issues, and understandably, that came up around this was affordability, because effectively it's adding a new fee for many people. Our program, as you saw in the presentation, if you were here for that meeting, has a unique and probably the most robust affordability program as it relates to trash prices in the country. But as you heard, and you heard it through some amendment requests and things like that, the key is we can have the greatest program in the country, but if nobody knows about it, we might as well not have it. So we'll be doing a lot of outreach. I'd encourage any of your networks. It's a great program, can take it all the way down to zero. And certainly if anybody has any questions on it, it's a shift. It's the same carts that have always been there. Just your purple cart will go every week, and you'll get a green cart if you don't already for compost on there. But it's a change. We want to make sure folks are armed with as much information as they can on there. So certainly, encourage folks to check out the affordability program if they think they might qualify for that. And if they have any questions, certainly I'm always happy to point guard for you guys. If you get questions, I'm happy to distribute it or answer it myself if I can on that. But very exciting, I think, for the city, and appreciate you all taking some time. I think we may have had a letter writer or letter to the editor amongst our committee, which was very appreciated, very well written, certainly on that. So good news. We'll celebrate good news when we get it. On that, the budget. So the other two are pretty quick. Budget still going on process here. Recommendations have been made to the budget office on that. So they review on there. Then ultimately the mayor will take those recommendations and develop his own budget. At that point, it's certainly in his hands. As is his privilege as being mayor on there. That will become public at that point, and that's where we can dive more into it with this group on there. But looking forward to that. And Earl, have you heard any updates on timing on that for when this group could kind of get some more additional information?
I think at this point it's kind of a rolling timeline because this particular go around, they are working to incorporate many of the I guess the feedback from the ARPA sessions and the additional ARPA funding that the city is working to spend up as part of round 2. So I think that they are going to here over the next about 3 to 4 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, review all of these requests. And then I think at that point, they should have some sort of draft here in about, maybe about 5 weeks, but I'll confirm that timeline.
And not to put you on the spot, Earl, but could I put you on the spot? The ARPA
Never,
round
Nick,
2
never can you do it.
the ARPA round 2, you know, as soon as you said that, I said, oh gosh, that would probably be a good item. Anything you want to update the group on what that is and the process that it's going through?
Yeah, so the ARPA round 2, I guess, funding process or allocation round is the second part of the $308 million that the city had received as part of the American Rescue Plan Act. So the city conducted over the last, I'd say about 6 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, a series of focus group sessions with many of the different community groups, whether they be Nest community groups or the citywide community groups. And then there was also a public, I guess, feedback session for at large across the city. So amongst all of those sort of feedback loops, the city worked together to prioritize some of the most important things that were voiced within those meetings, and they're working to incorporate that feedback into their final approved list of projects and initiatives that will govern how the $154 million, a part of round 2, will be spent. Just to give you some high level, I guess, feedback, some of the biggest areas, they weren't really too much surprise, but the recovery of small businesses post-pandemic and providing additional resources to those, making it easier to start businesses, and improving mobility infrastructure in underserved neighborhoods. So, and then there was a bunch of other things as well, such as, and these aren't necessarily DOTI related, but additional investments around community health and other areas as well. So that'll be included as part of the final, I guess not really final, but like the preliminary budget draft produced by the city here over the coming, I'd say about 2 months, just to give it time.
Thank you. Excellent assist there, Earl. I will stop there. Certainly open it up to the committee if there's any questions or anything you wanted to talk about with our staff here today.
I do have a potentially budget related question, but since I've been doing most of the talking here, I'm wondering if anyone else on the line has a question for Nick or Earl first. Adequate pause, seems like no. I have also seen a lot of notification going out and around about project ideas, particularly mobility project ideas, as part of Denver's participatory budgeting process. Is that part of this ARPA round 2 allocation, or are these two wholly separate items? And I mean, to whatever extent do you know, is the department currently involved in that participatory budgeting process, or are the results of that going to just sort of fund or inform some of the work you'll be doing in the next year?
So I believe those are two separate processes, because the items that were part of that were particularly related to mobility infrastructure that were part of ARPA, those were specific feedback areas that came from the focus groups. And I'm sure there probably will be some, there are some things that probably overlap to that, but the process as a whole is, they're two separate ones.
And that budgeting, the community-led budgeting, that is something using city funds, whereas of course ARPA would be federal funds. And that's something they've done, I mean, certainly as long as I've been here. I don't know when that process started, but certainly related, but yeah, I think to Earl's point, separate.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Sounds like no. All right, Nick, Earl, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So as we have a few more minutes before Stephen can join us, thought I would give a brief rundown or ask our committees to give a brief rundown of their reports, so what they've met and sort of concluded on over the last month. For sake of the public knowledge, most of our committees did not find an opportunity to meet in the last month. Scheduling issues, travel issues, things along those lines. We did receive a report from one committee, however, a June 15th meeting. That's the Policy Subcommittee. Was hoping that Jamie or another member of that group could give us a brief review of what you discussed, just to allow us to, ingest and perhaps ask a few questions.
Sure, this is Jamie, I'm the chair. We were focused on the scooter bike program, and we did get to meet with Stephen earlier in June in preparation for the meeting today. And we just wanted to kind of get some basic facts about the contract and see if there's any wiggle room. Our goal is that we would like to see other communities get involved with the bike share program or the contract. We've had some communities show some interest in the bikes only. So we're kind of like looking for a request for information from our vendors to see what areas actually might be profitable for them to operate. So Montbello is a perfect example. They're looking to maybe expand their program out there. They had recently bought about 20 bikes, but they would like to see more bikes out there. We continue to work on the right-of-way issue. We're going to present some slides in August, so to be determined on that. And we did have a question, and hopefully, Michelle, I was going to try to get that on the next agenda. We had a kind of a question about community engagement. And we noticed that a lot of projects are approved and kind of go through this committee, but then when they get to the community, we see a lot of changes. So we wanted to talk to staff about that. And we're also opening up discussion about micro transit. And we're looking into that. And also we were curious about the sidewalk ballot issue that will be on the November ballot, and to see what preparation DOTI is doing for that. So we requested those to be on the next meeting agenda. So that's our report. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Okay, just looking down our set of business here. That is our policy report, and I just to be sure I didn't miss something along the way here. I believe that no other committees met in the last month. Am I correct in that understanding? Is there another committee member here present from another committee that does have a report out? Sounds like no. Okay. Well then,
so Jonathan, Paige Colton is on right now. She's the next agenda item. I don't know if you want to skip Stephen and come back.
And so I was considering that, but I didn't know if Stephen had sort of a hard limit on the other side of his presentation. If we're open to that, we could absolutely move to detour instead.
That's what I would do.
Okay. All right, Paige, yeah, if you're ready, just to intro to everyone on the line here. We discussed at our last meeting, perhaps the one before, about some new, I shouldn't say new so much as an formalizing of some regulations around pedestrian safety and detours near construction sites. There was sort of an executive version of these rules, an executive mandate for rules like these, or like a subset of these rules, created a few years ago, but they were recently moved through a formal rules and regs process. Given that I don't think that news was widely known or understood amongst the community, we thought it would be great to have Paige, who was involved in that process, let us know a little bit about what changed and what that means for the community of Denver. So Paige, if you're ready to go.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much. And thanks all for having me. I'm Paige Colton. I'm a senior city planner here at DOTI. And I worked on our initiative we call Detour, which stands for Designing Efficient Transportation Options for Urban Rerouting. But really, all that to say, our goal was to reduce the impact of construction on people walking, rolling, taking transit, biking, basically better accommodating people moving outside of their car around construction sites. So I'm going to give a brief presentation and then you can let me know if you have any questions. I'm able to share my screen here, it looks like.
Are you able to? Is that, you have
Yeah.
permission? Yeah, okay, good.
Okay, can you all see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Let's see, hold on. If I switch, is this showing my screen or my PowerPoint presentation? I'm less familiar with Zoom.
It's
It is
showing your
current-
screen.
It's showing
My
PowerPoint, but
screen.
it's not a presentation version. It's
Got it,
just,
okay, yeah, thank you. Okay. So
So now we see your email. We see your Outlook.
again,
We see your Outlook.
still see my Outlook?
We see your Outlook now. I see your emails.
Okay. Still?
Nope, that's good.
Okay.
Go with that.
yeah, this works.
Not what I meant to do. I apologize. Okay, there we go. Okay, so why are we doing this? Why have we done this, made these modifications to rules and regulations? So we have a couple kind of planning overall guidance documents that tell us we really need to be making improvements for people walking, biking, transit, biking, rolling around construction sites. One of those is Denver, our Vision Zero Action Plan. The other is Denver Moves Pedestrians and Trails, and the third is Blueprint Denver. So in all of those are policy recommendations to improve things at construction sites. So these are the three documents, I guess, that we modified through Detour. The first is rules and regulations documents. So that's rules and regulations pertaining to the issuance of permits by the city traffic engineer. So essentially, anytime someone wants to use the public right-of-way, either for construction, for an event, for short-term work, like maybe Excel has to fix something, they have to apply for a permit, and that permit is granted by the city traffic engineer. And these rules and regulations really regulate what and how that happens. So we made modifications that were adopted earlier this year. And this is the one that required a comment period and public hearing. So it's a little bit more of a intensive process to make that modification, but we were able to do that. The second document that we modified was the general traffic control procedures for street/public occupancy permits. And that's really just a detailed requirement list of what's needed for work zones, closures, detours, really anything that's needed for those permits. And we updated that earlier this year as well and are about to post that on our website. And then lastly, we have a consolidated fee schedule. So if you are applying for one of these permits, you have to pay if there are any closures or detours, or pay a penalty if you do not comply. And that's what this fee schedule walks through essentially. And we originally had that in the rules and regulations. We have pulled that out to make it easier to modify in the future, so that if some of the other requirements we've put in place don't really make a big enough change, we can modify the fee schedule or the fees to provide more economic incentives for contractors and those planning events to do the right thing. So just a kind of high level overview of the changes that we've made. So the first is we formerly really didn't have any guidance in prioritizing people walking or biking around these work zones. And Now in our guidance, we prioritize space for people walking, rolling, and biking in work zones that are around for more than 72 hours. Formerly, there were not any requirements for sidewalk or bike lane closures or detours. And now we have requirements for any type of closures or detours of sidewalks, crosswalks, bike lanes, bus stops, and parking. Previously, we had essentially higher fees if you are closing a travel lane or a sidewalk in the central business district in Cherry Creek area. So that was a little bit of penalty if you close the sidewalk, but only in those specific areas. And we've actually expanded the definition of what we're calling these premium high use areas. So really they're areas we expect to see more people walking and biking, essentially denser, more urban areas. So we've defined those as any pedestrian enhanced area that's defined in Blueprint Denver, and anything on our high injury network. So part of our Vision Zero high injury network, our road network, where there's a lot of serious injuries and crashes. So essentially, this covers quite a bit of the city, and we have pretty strict requirements on what closures and accommodations are required in those premium high use areas. So we have a level of, we want to prioritize sidewalks, prioritize bike lanes. And then in these premium high use areas, there's really no getting around providing that, keeping those open. And then kind of some, well, if you can't keep the sidewalk open, maybe you put a covered walkway in those premium high use areas. Okay, so in addition, formerly we only required advance notice of some sort of closure for no parking zones. And now we have a new requirement that requires hang tags to go on every adjacent property owner, business, resident, of their door that says this change is coming. There's going to be some sort of new way to get around. And then also you're required to put up a sign that says, we are this company, we're going to have changes for this amount of time, and here's our contact information. So that allows people, not only those who who live nearby or maybe have a business nearby, to understand what changes are going to happen, but also maybe people visiting a bus stop or people who walk by every day will be able to know what's coming. As I mentioned, we removed the fee schedule from that rules and regulations to make it easier to modify in the future. And then the last two changes we made, previously there weren't that many penalties if you did not abide by these rules and regulations. And now we have much better defined penalties for those who aren't complying. So it gives us more tools to make sure that bikes and pedestrians are being accommodated. And then lastly, we are requiring for larger projects a contractor parking plan. And so this isn't really related to bikes and peds, but is more about in areas with a lot of development, kind of on-street parking management, making sure there's enough for both contractors and whoever else is using the street. So that is my presentation. I'm going to open it up to questions and stop sharing.
Thank you for the summary page. As someone who has read through the documents and sort of their detailed rule language, it is a bit overwhelming. So the brief summary of what does this really mean for us is very helpful. Looks like we have one question up already from Alan.
I can't tell you how exciting this is. So I just wanted to thank you and everybody on the team for this work. As someone that bikes and walks and also drives around the city, I think this is a great improvement. Question for someone that's experiencing this or for folks in our communities. How can we tell is there an easy way for us to tell if something is in compliance or not? Is there a way, I'm guessing, is 311 the best way for us to reach out if we feel something isn't in compliance with some of these detours?
Yeah, Alan, that's a great question. I might check on that and get back to you. I don't know if Nick is on and knows the answer to that question. You could call the contractor directly. 311 is also a great resource, I think, generally. Contractors are required to submit a traffic control plan when they apply for a permit. So our inspectors can kind of check against that to make sure they're in compliance. But I'm not sure if those are posted publicly. So let me get back to you, Alan.
But just to add, I think Paige got it. Yeah, the part, one of the elements of this is having that contact information for the contractor on there. But if you're seeing something that isn't how it should be, 311 is still nobody's favorite, but the best way.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah, that's a critical question because, of course, the department can't be everywhere. Enforcement is hard with any policy, especially new policies. Looks like Jake has a question.
Thanks, Jonathan. I am absolutely with Alan. I could not be more excited about this. I think it's much needed, and I'm excited to see the changes go into effect. I think I walk a lot and pretty desperate for I've come across too many intersections where you arrive at the intersection in all three directions, the sidewalk is closed, and you're like, what do I do now? So I'm very excited that you guys have these plans together. I did have a couple of questions. I might just ask them both at once just to make it easier on you. But my first question is, like, when does this go into effect, as far as like when should we expect to start seeing projects that are impacted by this, and what happens with existing projects as well? And then my second question is, I'm really curious how this will get enforced from the closure side on the utility side. That's actually where I see and I hear from my neighbors the most concerns. Like, for example, last year we had a apparently 3-month parking lane closure in Capitol Hill, which is pretty dramatic for Capitol Hill, but it wasn't even permitted, and they just put up signs on their own, and 311 couldn't address it. So I'm like curious how that works. As well, the people installing fiber and 5G infrastructure park on the sidewalks in Capitol Hill regularly, and claim they have permits. In my building, they park on our building sidewalk all the time, and they won't disclose their permits, and we find out when there's a giant caterpillar parked on our sidewalks. So I'm kind of curious from like the right-of-way aspect, like what happens when it's not a traditional construction site, because I actually think that's where we're seeing more closures. The traditional construction sites are impactful because they're 2 years long, but the day-to-day impacts are really those utility work that happens every day all over the place. Sorry for my long-windedness.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks for those questions. So I can definitely answer the first one. I might ask Nick if he has any thoughts on the second one about utility work. But the answer to your first question is, this will start applying to anyone who's newly applying for permits, a street occupancy permits. So it won't retroactively affect existing construction projects or those who have already had their permits approved. So I think it could be a wide range of kind of when we start seeing it go into effect, just because of how long these processes take, how long construction sites are in the ground sometimes. So that's the answer to that one. Nick. Oh.
And sorry, Paige, that was good. You caught that I on mute. But this is now, because this was promulgated earlier, so this is the regulation of the land. So if I were to go try to take out a permit, I would need to comply with this today, correct?
Correct.
And so then it's just a matter of old projects falling off, all new projects going forward from whenever that was on there. This is these are the rules. And then I think, Jake, to your other questions, you know, this applies to everyone. You know, again, not to sound like a broken record, but when you see that stuff 311 and, you know, safety, especially stuff like that, that is really impacting safety, folks, those inspectors will be out there and addressing it. And yeah, whether they're Verizon, whether it's DOTI or Parks or another contractors, this applies to them as well.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I implore the department to potentially look at applying those fines even after the incident is, if there's 311 evidence, because I think so often, you know, a vehicle parked on the sidewalk is gone by the 3 weeks later it gets to an inspector, and then we're told, you know, they didn't find anything when they went out and looked,
Right.
which makes sense. So I think just ways to actually address this, because it is a pretty big impact on quality of life.
Agreed.
Thanks, Jake. Jamie.
Yeah, just a quick question. Do you guys coordinate with RTD on, especially the smaller projects that are like 72 hours to avoid any conflicts?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. So the less than 72 hours, those are regulated a little bit differently. Nick, I don't know if you know more about that, or I should ask the less than 72-hour projects.
Probably could use some clarity. My understanding is yes, but we'll get the experts.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Hey, Jonathan, you're muted.
Didn't realize, over here talking to myself. All right. So I know we have pretty much just like a minute left on this topic, maybe two. I'm seeing no other new hands, so wanted to ask a couple of quick questions of my own. One, for clarity, on your slides, you mentioned defining premium high use areas. If I recall from the rules that I saw, these rules do not only apply to the premium high use areas, there are just different rules and different fees that apply to those areas. These rules apply all over the city. Am I correct in that understanding?
Yes, you're correct, Jonathan.
Awesome.
Yeah. So priority is always for bikes and peds. In premium high use areas, it's more stringent on what's required.
Awesome. Okay. And I guess this is a bit detailed, but one of the questions we started with from Alan was, how do we know if things are in compliance? There's two questions. How do we report, but how do we know if things are in compliance? Like, do we know if there's a permit for something that we see? Again, just sort of to democratize access to people being able to figure out what's going on and really, really help the department by not asking you to be everywhere all the time. I'd love to know more about the permit publication. I know that the e-permits website includes a lot of types of permits. I know there's another separate website for special event permits. I don't know where these permits would fall, like where we should look for them. I know there's even, I think for some of the permits, there's a map of where all current, others, yeah, for right-of-way encumbrances, there's a map of current permits. Maybe this falls there. So would love as part of that follow-up to figure out which of those sites would we go to if we just personally wanted to see, is there a permit for this or not? So yeah, not a question on the line. I know you said, well, we need to look into it, but just some specific avenues there.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thanks, Jonathan. And yeah, I know, in specific areas like in the NDCC area, they had a map that kind of showed where the permits were pulled for and when, in order to help the public kind of navigate all those construction sites. So I know for specific areas, sometimes we do provide a handy map for that, but I'll check for the rest of them, what that looks like.
All right, awesome. So we're just a minute or so over time on this topic. Any final questions for Paige before we move on to Stephen's presentation?
Yeah, Jonathan, I had one. So is this, how detailed does this get? I haven't read it, but is this like sidewalk closed crossover? Or are we actually talking about having to make temporary bike lanes and all that? Can it get that involved, Paige?
Yeah, Joe, it does get that involved. So it kind of provides a list of priority. So the first priority is keeping the sidewalk open. Second priority is putting a sidewalk next to the curb with Jersey barriers. So it kind of gets into like what we'd like to see out there. And then the last or worst priority is to detour people walking and biking on a equally safe and comfortable route, essentially. So yeah, I'm happy to share the rules and regs, and you can take a look at those.
Thank you.
All right. With that, we are certainly out of time. Need to move on to Stephen. Thanks again, Paige, for joining us. I share in Alan and everyone's excitement about this. Very much looking forward to the implementations as they roll through. And with that, next topic here is actually two topics. Stephen Rio, please let me know if I've mispronounced that when you get started here. But it's going to let us know, give us a status update on Denver's shared micro-mobility program, which I think came into effect about 1 year ago, as well as an update on the Montbello Connector Microtransit pilot. So Stephen, if you're ready, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, you bet. And I'm actually going to flip it slightly and start with the connector presentation because I think it's a little shorter and quicker. And then we'll save more time for chatting about shared micromobility. So let me share my screen and we'll dive in. All right, so hopefully folks are seeing a slide about the connector program. Excellent. And so yeah, with that, my name is Stephen Rijo, Principal City Planner. I work on DOTI's transit team, so helping to plan transit specifically today, here to talk about our service programs of the connector and shared micromobility, but work on other things, corridor studies, Colfax BRT, things like that. So we'll follow a quick flow of service ridership, get into the extension and expansion of this service, and cool photo of both programs in the same place. So with that, starting with folks, to help them understand, what we're talking about when we talk about the connector service in Montbello and microtransit, sort of those vehicles filling everything between traditional fixed route transit, buses and trains, and the personal automobiles. So the three vehicles we're running currently are that Ford Transit vehicle that has a wheelchair lift. We then have a plug-in hybrid minivan. That's the top right photo. And then a fully electric crossover vehicle, bottom right photo. So those are the three vehicles we're running the service with. I often think it's helpful to visualize. So a little more on the service. We planned it in 2020 with stakeholders. As we can all remember, there was a lot going on there. So just like to call out that our stakeholders who attended meetings, did a lot of things during Zoom, just impressed that we were able to do such a productive process in the middle of the early days of the pandemic. Calling out that it's a partnership with our climate office. They provide the funding for about a quarter of our service and push us to electrify it, some of those vehicles I mentioned, and is a 12-month pilot, but as you're about to hear, looking to extend. It's a weekday service from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., so covering a large span of the day. It's fare free currently, so really great free service to help get folks around. It's app-based, so similar to using Uber or Lyft. Interact with an app. There is a call-in number available, and we offer both our call center and our app in English and Spanish, since we know that's key for this neighborhood and Denver as a whole. It's point-to-point trips and on demand. So again, somewhat similar to like an Uber pool or Lyft line used to operate. You say where you need to go, when you need to go there. It'll give you a timeline for your pickup and then, follow the vehicle coming to get you on the app. We've built this to have a 30-minute response time with the goal of most trips happening in 15 minutes. And then it serves trips within the Montbello zone or between the zone and the Peoria station. So in the map in the top right, you can see that zone that covers all of Montbello and then has a point over at the Peoria station and a little bit of a blob into where the rec center is there, technically in the Gateway neighborhood. So then a little bit on ridership. can see there, our top line was sort of the goal. Then we have a 6-month check-in, and then one I pulled on our most recent report at the end of June. And so, kind of the goal is really, what would your average service like this, well-performing look like? And so you can see that we've exceeded a lot of those expectations in ridership. Passenger per service hour, to see that 5.5 is really remarkable for how many folks were moving on these services. Now, what you do start to see is the response time get a little longer with a free service, right? As that queue builds longer, the response times get a little longer. So we've definitely been a victim of our own success in some ways, but still glad to be providing a service that's under that 30-minute advertisement, and still pretty close to the 15-minute goal on average. But again, some high times we've definitely run into the challenge of a free service is folks will take advantage of it, which is a great thing. So then a few other items wanted to call out, our all-time ridership, show folks our busiest day and busiest hour to again show that there are some days where we've been moving tons of people. It's almost unbelievable we were able to move 38 people in an hour. So really moving a lot of folks with this service, and then highlighting, not in order, but the 5 top pickup and drop-offs have sort of hardened in the bottom right there. And so really any given month, the top 5 are the transit station, there's a Walmart neighborhood market along Chambers, the rec center, Montbello Central Park, so that's the Central Park. There are a few schools in that campus, and then the Boys and Girls Club. And so last slide here, talking about our extension and expansion, given the initial success in Montbello, we are extending that service for 2 more years. So don't want to end something that's going well, partnering with the same partners to keep that going. And then also we are currently planning an expansion to Gateway. So that's the small neighborhood just east of Montbello, kind of bound by Peoria. A lot of people think of it as Montbello, but technically another neighborhood. And then also expanding to the Globeville and Elyria Swansea neighborhoods. Those are the ones we're planning underway right now. We are sort of next in line thinking about an expansion to the west side, and likely beyond that would step back, try to study, where in the city are the best places to add these? Where might the city fund it? Where might we look for other partners? What does that all look like to be strategic? Because we want to make sure we're growing this sustainably. Because I think the worst case I really want to avoid is we add these to communities and have to take them away. So we'd much rather grow incrementally, know that we can keep it and afford it, things like that. As I mentioned here, the focus really for DOTI is on equity, where our communities that kind of pop on our equity index, places with disconnected land uses that maybe don't lend themselves to traditional buses, trains, fixed route transit. And then, as I showed on my last slide, those connections to RTD regional transit, grocery stores, city services, and youth needs have really shown to be high ridership. So making sure we can connect folks in those communities to those services, and always coordinating with RTD, as they've been really excited about how we can move folks within their neighborhoods and then connect to those regional services. So with that, happy to do a few minutes of questions and then can transition the next 25 minutes to shared micromobility. So yeah.
Thanks, Stephen. I'll kick off with a question from the chat here. Alicia's asking, can you share this presentation with us?
Yeah, definitely. I'll shoot over a PDF version to my partners to get to you after this, so definitely.
Excellent. A couple questions of my own as I was reading as I was reading the slides there. When you say you want to extend 2 years, do you mean an additional 2 years or extend it from 12 months to 24 months total?
An additional 2 years, so it'll be a 3-year pilot total. That's roughly the bounds we have within our current agreement before, we should realistically do a more formal procurement, RFP, things like that. So what we're thinking is this gives us 2 years of runway to figure out what that procurement looks like, where we might be scaling this a little bit, maybe not. We'll figure that out over the next 2 years. But yeah, based on the success in Montbello, not wanting to end that. And then also the GES neighborhoods being the next highest on our list, wanting to make sure we're providing some service there where it's needed.
Okay, and Jamie, I do see your hand up, but Paul messaged in the chat first here, a question about pickup points. Paul, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, Stephen, looking at those numbers, that was amazing how they're already ahead of what the projections are. Question for you, and I realize this service is designed to be more a fine instrument than a blunt tool, but knowing that your 5 largest pickup points are there and knowing that the front door is often slightly off street side or whatnot, especially I'm picturing that Walmart neighborhood market plaza. I know how much time a vehicle loses just slowing down and going deep into a parking lot. Has there been any discussion about moving pickup points to more exterior points of areas where the entrance is set back more just to speed the process up? I realize that becomes strikingly similar in definition to how a bus works as opposed to a neighborhood commuter tool, but has that come up in discussion? I'm purely curious about that.
Yeah, I appreciate the question and kind of the thoughtfulness in realizing that it is this, we're trying to institute micro transit. There is transit out there. RTD does a great job. We partner with them. How do we fill that gap between what RTD is great at and what we know folks need? To your question, it was a great one because we've actually done that. So at the Montbello Central Park area, that was in response to large demand, both in all the schools that share that campus, but then the park itself being a nice destination for a number of reasons. Our vehicles kept getting stuck in the school queues. And so we said, man, that's not a great use of anybody's time. If we can get folks to a more centralized location that can have quicker pickups, that's a better idea. So that's actually one example where we've instituted that. I could see a world where based on our data, there becomes a route that's involved, or there are more set pickups and maybe it's more on a schedule, but at least for this pilot wanting to really test point to point on demand. And I alluded to it, but a real benefit there is it gives us really rich data of exactly where people want to go to and from. And so you can zoom out and build routes and other things off that. You can say, actually, this trip pattern would be better served by RTD. Let's try and partner to buy up service on that route. But it's actually this other one where we're filling a real need. Maybe that's where the city should lean in. So all the things we've been learning, and a really good question.
I'm kind of curious where the intersection of a program like this overlaps with, does things better than, maybe isn't as efficient as things like, the RTD call and ride that existed for so long out of Park and Rides, or, I know DU had sort of a local commuter transit that sort of, and that was a private enterprise because it was, I believe, predominantly funded by the school for use of its students, but sort of filled that last mile need for the community from the light rail station deeper into the neighborhood. So just curiosity is all.
Yeah, no, great questions, and partnered with DU on some of the work that they did to pull that together in the past and previous microtransit efforts. So yeah, I think it's definitely one where we're partnering closely with RTD. I've always say it how do we play to everyone's strengths? Let's provide the local service for Denver's neighborhoods. They're great at providing regional trips, but currently it'll probably feel duplicative during the pilot. Beyond that, maybe there would be a pull back one thing to build up another, or vice versa, but I'd hate to take something away and then this goes away. And so that's a world I really want to avoid.
Thank you. Jamie.
Good to see you again, Stephen. Two-part question. What budget line item is this coming out of in the city? And the second part is a question, what can we do to secure funding after the 2 years? Do you have any suggestions on?
Yeah, thank you. So through the pilot, definitely one of those cobbling many sources to make it work type of answer, but the larger buckets are some coming through the special revenue fund, as we call it. So that was related to the meter increases, putting that money right back into these types of services. Another piece of that is Kazer's partnership. Again, they provide about a quarter of the funding to help us electrify this service. And then the rest is sort of a mix of, operational and capital budgets just to make it work. So to your question on how we structure this long-term, I think those are conversations we should all huddle back with, Nick, myself, and others, but probably a more standard commitment in that special revenue fund and some dedicated operating dollars to help us lock in what, industry prefers are usually more 3 to 5 year agreements. the operator knows they can invest and it makes sense, and we know that they're not going to up and run in a year. So this pilot was sort of more of a cobbling together. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, okay. And Alicia had a question in the chat here, which is how are
You're on
drivers?
mute, Jamie, just to let you know. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry, didn't see him speaking.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to finish up. I was telling Stephen, we probably should start have this conversation same time next year in preparation for that last year. So that's what I was trying to say. I apologize.
Yeah, that's a great call out. And then Alicia's question here with how are drivers and partners selected and screened?
Can you please repeat the question? I was typing a note to Jamie's comment.
Oh yeah, all good. Go ahead, Alicia.
I was just trying to figure out or understand how you select the partners that are going to be operating the rides, as well as how are they screened?
Yeah, so the agreement, which I didn't get into here, so it's a good question, is with Northeast Transportation Connections. They're a local transportation management association. They're the one who our contract is with because they've been a great partner in the area. They subcontracted the operations. And so that's bringing an app, that's vehicle maintenance, that's hiring drivers to a group called Downtowner, who operates services across the state and across the country, kind of, again, letting folks do what they do best. NETC connecting us to the community, Downtowner having a tried and true operation. To your question about drivers, they go through a rigorous background check and are paid at a level that we think makes this a very competitive job to recruit good talent. Sometimes folks ask, you're in some ways paying more than it would be to just buy up some Lyft and Uber trips. Why are you doing that? And it comes back to this of, if the city's going to partner with someone and we're going to put our name on a service, we want to know it's consistent, that we have good drivers, that we have professional partners who are solving issues if there is a challenge that does arise, whereas an Uber or a Lyft can be any vehicle, any driver, no branding. So that was important to us to have professional drivers that most of them are local as well, as that was a hiring requirement. Like, let's have folks who know their community driving in their community. That anecdote of leaning out the window and like, hey, Bob, I know you're trying to go. Like, we're friends from school or church or something like that. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of a question of my own here. I know one big complaint with the sort of demise of many taxi-based companies and increase of Uber and Lyft trips around the city is that Uber and Lyft also often do not have vehicles or drivers who can account for disability accommodations. I don't know if you already mentioned this in the presentation. I'm sorry if you did, but are these vehicles, can these accommodate riders with special needs for access? Looks like you're going back to a slide I probably should have seen.
Yes, so our largest vehicle has a wheelchair lift, and it's a great point. That was important. We knew we needed to offer that. And so that was a requirement of our service. So truly in the nature of a pilot, testing 3 different vehicle types, sizes, engine types, trying to learn what the community likes, what helps us move the most people. Frankly, there have been a lot of lessons learned on operating electric services and things like charging and range that didn't have to think of previously as a transit planner. So yeah, great question, and something that's been important and we've seen fair use of. So meeting that demand.
Awesome. I don't see any other hands raised. Are we clear on this topic before moving on to micromobility? Just going to give it a moment. Sounds like yes. So Stephen, we can move along.
Excellent. And let me share the next presentation. Which I'll announce for timekeeping. We probably spent 5 more minutes on that one than I'd planned for this one. So I might try and move a little quickly to get us to Q&A, as I know that's often the best part of these. So I know it'll be a lot of info here. All right, so again, now it is hopefully the shared micromobility program presentation. Great. Again, a little background for folks, get into the history, talk about program management, share really some staggering ridership growth numbers, and with a brief look ahead and get into Q&A. So I often like to start here and be curious if there's a story or two from the group. Has anyone ridden bike or scooter share in Denver? How was it? What'd you like? What'd you not? I don't know if one or two folks want to jump in.
My only experience is prior to this program existing. So in the before times, I feel like it's not as good of a comment, but Paul has a hand here.
I was just curious. So I happened to be downtown multiple times for Avalanche Victory Parade, several of the games with watch parties that brought thousands of people down. I'm always curious to know if, I know most of the mobility is provided by 2 or 3 or 4 big companies, and I'm very curious if they bring extra inventory into metro areas where they're expecting sort of these big, like a parade level event or something like that, like a postseason sporting series or a rally or a parade or a political convention or something like that. Because it seemed to me that I expected there to be a major shortage of shared mobility units, and they were everywhere I looked, which was a pleasant surprise. So.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear, and I'll say there are some slides getting into that later on that'll have some details. We don't grow inventory in one-off day events based on how we structure fleets. We will have increased management. So we'll have operators having staff out there organizing, making sure that things are a little more dialed in for those major events. So respond.
Alan, do you have an experience to share?
Yeah, I've used it. I primarily use my own private bike, but sometimes that's in the shop, or sometimes I have a one-way trip where it doesn't make sense to take my own bike or car. And I started out as a big fan of the bikes. I was scared of the scooters, but they've kind of grown into me based on the models evolving in recent years. So it's actually been pleasant surprise of being able to use it. It's just, sometimes it's not always available in the neighborhood, but when it is, it's nice to have.
Glad to hear. So appreciate those anecdotes and spot on. In the few years of this program and pilot, the advances in the vehicles have really helped make them better, safer. So yeah, thanks for those anecdotes, and dive into the presentation here. So with that, a brief history that I think is likely not too much news for this group of how we had an agreement with B-Cycle for a decade. Unfortunately, that wasn't renewed at the 10-year mark. Around that time, started testing dockless mobility. Nick and others on this call did a lot of work for that. And that a little over a year ago, launched our license program with Lime and Lyft. And so highlighting what our starting fleet was, which for us was roughly replacing what was lost with pilot program scooters and the B-Cycle program bikes. And as I'll discuss a little bit, we have utilization-based increases that have grown the fleets to that number at the bottom there. That's for each operator. And just highlighting here that, why we go through the trouble of a license, it makes us partners with these operators and leads to a lot of long-term outcomes you'll hear me talk about. So sharing ridership since bike and scooter share started, this is pilot program and license program, nearly 9 million trips with a median per day in the 6,000 range. And when you calculate that based on what we've seen in Denver, we've seen in other cities, it replaces roughly 3.5 million driving trips that have been avoided. And then since we launched the license program, you can see ridership even growing, and sort of that hypothesis of if you partner with folks, if you grow, in an organized way, in a managed way, you can increase ridership even more. And so of that roughly 10 million, 5.5 have been in the last year and a month or so. And the median over that year is 12,000. Our max single day a few weeks ago for an Avalanche game was over 36,000 trips in a single day. And so like for comparison, that's like the ADT or traffic count of like a Broadway or a Colfax, some of our city's biggest arterials. And so thinking we're moving the same number of people that like an A line moves of 15L on these across our whole city. how do we take it seriously? And that's equated to almost 2 million trips reduced. So why are we going through all the trouble to figure these things out? It's because people like them and they ride them a lot, and in a way that, for reference, B-Cycle's busiest year was about 360,000 trips in a year. We are many times above that. It's just exciting to see, but with it comes some challenges as well. So kind of some highlights of the license requirements and the kind of bullets here. Data sharing is a huge part of this. We would not be able to manage it if we were out there counting things manually. I highlight that in the license, a big upgrade, in my opinion, was we created a 2-hour parking response. So in the pilot, if there was an issue, we'd call and say, hey, there's a problem. They may help, they may not. It wasn't a part of their permit. Now in the license, most issues need a remedy within 2 hours. And so if you see those 2 photos at the bottom of the screen, this was from the All-Star game now, roughly 2 years ago. And unfortunately, this pile was caused by some bad actors. People poorly park all types of vehicles, from cars to bikes to scooters. It was an issue, but when it was sent to me, sent it to the operators, and that photo on the right was sent back about 15 minutes later of all those vehicles organized. So it's sort of this, people do foolish things, whatever they're riding or riding in and on, but it's how do you have a mechanism to react to it? That was big for us. We created opportunity areas, which I have a map later on, helping to spread the vehicles out, that 30% of the fleet start in those neighborhoods every morning, sort of to counter that charge that this was really a downtown program back when B-Cycle was our bike provider and also during the pilot program. We noticed a preference towards scooters for what people were renting and therefore what the operators were providing. But I think to Alan's point, we know a lot of folks like the bikes, B-Cycle system was great. And so we made a requirement that while there is a cap for scooters, you can't deploy more than a certain number. It's actually a floor for bikes that you must deploy 20% of your scooter fleet in bikes. And so that was our way to make sure that the city had bikes and actually encourage more bikes, kind of over deployment of bikes, if you will, relative to scooters, since again, we hear those are important to folks. The 5280 free pass programs, we locked in an exchange of value from both operators. They're offering slightly different but real value passes for riders that we haven't really leaned into giving out yet. And the thought was, these are 5-year licenses. We're building out a lot from stations and other things we'll talk about here. And so wanting the folks that get the free pass to experience a more mature version of the program, they were really on pause for year 1, but we're now working to get those out, especially in this busy season. That is separate from our equity programs that we locked in the license. So I want to be very clear to this group. If you have constituents, partners, folks you represent who fall into the need-based groups that qualify for local, state, or federal aid, you get near free use of this program. And that's, beyond this 5280 program. So I often say that I think this is a very undersold part of the program. We need to do a better job of getting the word out. But if you qualify for aid at any level, you get near free use of the system. And I think we need to let folks know, since that's a great option in those communities. And that lastly, utilization-based fleets, based on the number of trips vehicles are doing, there's this calculation, trip per vehicle per day, TVD, you'll see later. If they clear a certain threshold over a several month period, they can increase fleets. If not, the fleets stay the same. That's how we've gotten those increases so far. Really to say, what is the right number of bikes and scooters in Denver? It's an open question. We've never had full saturation in our entire city, but trying to make it grow sustainably and not just be that there are more of these than are even getting used. So those are the highlights of the license. And I think I'll just call out a few other items we're working on. That we have a partner in Ride Report with the Denver Regional Council of Governments. That's how we manage this. You'll see a lot of screenshots from Ride Report. Clearly, education and enforcement are a large part of what we do. So you can see a screenshot in the top left there of the in-app messaging that Lime's currently pushing to all their riders about how to not ride on sidewalks, things like that. And then, enforcement, whether that's our right-of-way agents writing tickets for the vehicles, and kind of what I showed at the bottom there, whether it's technology. You can see a geofence there on 16th Street Mall in the top right, tweaking those. I think is actually questions I was sent before this highlight that we're learning in a lot of ways. Technology is that hammer, not the scalpel. It can be useful in some instances, but is not a direct line in the sand. And so I think just highlighting that's a great tool. We use it for education, but it's always balancing those safety of all users and how we scale that up. Get into stations and corrals. And I think just highlighting that, you know, the city's taking this seriously. This used to be a large part of my job and some other folks I was working with. And in the last year, we've added, you know, the equivalent of 2 more individuals working on this. So kind of putting our money where our mouth is and taking this seriously as a transportation mode. But again, a lot going on here. So with that, we have reports that we've done, the operators do annual reports. And I really just put this up there to show that we found that bike and scooter share ridership is just generally more diverse than Denver as a whole, and really hitting a lot of the indicators for connecting to transit, helping folks who don't own a car, things like that. So just encouraging data points as to why we're doing this and trying to scale it up. So again, with parking enforcement, folks do foolish things. I think earlier, right, talking about people who just park on the sidewalk in their car. Unfortunately, someone took the time to do this, but again, you know, without places to park their vehicles, we'll see some of that. So we started working with DOTI. How do we install some city corrals, personal bikes, put a space for bikes and scooters? That's one example of the DOTI corrals we've been building out all over the city. But then both operators have a requirement to build approximately 200 stations each across the city. And so here are some examples of early ones from Lyft and Lime. You may have seen a few of these out there. And, you know, ultimately, once we've built out the system, it could be a world where there's a nudge to start or end your trips in a corral, for example. So I think, again, it's just new days. We're building this transportation mode as we go. I think getting those corrals out will be really helpful. Again, similar to B-Cycle, how folks knew you could count on a bike being there, you knew where to return it. So a lot of work going into that. We obviously use the violations. So our right-of-way agents are out there marking violations that go back to the operators for that 2-hour response time. You know, here's a heat map of where those are happening, largely a factor of ridership. We take that data. Some other data here is one screenshot of trip starts and ends overlaid with violation data. And we say, you know, where are there violations? Where's there a need for trips? That's where we should cite these corrals and stations. So last couple of slides here. This is a map of our opportunity areas. So those dark shaded areas are the places where the vehicles need to have, you know, 30% each morning or each day. And so again, trying to spread it out using our equity index and some other factors to more of the city. We use, as I mentioned, that ride report tool to track compliance in real time. Again, we're not out there counting all the vehicles in each neighborhood. And then we get email notifications to ourselves and the operators if anybody is out of compliance. But again, our operators have been doing a great job hitting all these marks. So a few slides on ridership, and I picked sort of Junes over the years because we now have 4 Junes of ridership. And so on these next 4 slides, you'll see the trips for that month, the highest single day, the median per day, and then what the average fleet was, and that trip per vehicle per day, kind of a utilization-based metric. The TVD for like other cities, kind of industry standard, folks are usually pretty happy to get to 2 and really excited if they get to 3. The fact that Denver's seeing these across the board is just really high. So this was 1 year of the pilot early on, downtown centered, but seeing high ridership for a single month, you know, relative to B-Cycle. Then in June of 2020, again, probably an asterisk for what was happening in the world at this time, but second year of the pilot, you can see the fleets are larger, the trips grow considerably, that max single day nearly doubling, and then TVD kind of staying in a similar place. Now a big jump when we have our first year of the license program, trips more than doubling there. We see a max single day just shy of 19,000, medians in the 12. Again, that's moving the number of people each day as like a Downing Street at this time last year, the average fleet in that TVD of 5. And then when you look at this year, again, a doubling of that ridership, much more citywide with the larger fleets, those max single days and medians that I mentioned earlier. So again, I don't think we've hit the ceiling of ridership for this, and it's really highlighted. We need to build more protected bike lanes, more trails. Like, people are riding these in large numbers on every street. How do we get to that multimodal future that many folks on this call have been interested in? And then I made a GIF showing that ridership so folks can kind of see the growth. I do think it's just remarkable. As you know, when I was managing our relationship with B-Cycle, we'd hear, how do we get these into more neighborhoods? And it's been really exciting to start to deliver that to much more of our city. So I want to highlight that a lot of this data is available publicly. We were one of the second cities to launch a open data portal. So if you search, Ride Report Denver Open Data Portal, we provide a lot of this data publicly. You can download it, really there to help transparency, collaboration with peer cities, advocates, educators, things like that. So definitely do poke around, and also highlighting that we have a city website where we provide info on, how citizens can report improperly parked vehicles through our system. So it'll notify the operators. A lot of useful tips and tricks on how to interact with the program there. And that's the city website there. And so sort of the last thing here, and then can transition to Q&A. But as I mentioned, for some of these big events, this was Rocky's opening day this year. I think to Paul's question, see really increased demand, like crazy high ridership, getting folks to that event in ways that wouldn't be possible if every one of these people was driving a car, causing some challenges when there's a convergence of that many vehicles in one place. And so after opening day was sort of business as usual, there were some challenges. And so we started, through the help of my colleague Lily, doing a lot more management of events. And so working with our major Empower Field, Ball Arena, Coors Field, where we see, thousands of these vehicles for events, having both some help with people on the ground to organize the vehicles, like in this photo, but then even using some geofences to get at, sidewalk riding, or as I show in this next slide, preferred parking areas. And so just highlighting that at these big events, as Paul mentioned, the parades, we've been partnering to learn a lot, and you find some things that you put a preferred parking area and 80% of vehicles end up there, but then the other 20% end up across the street from that because people slow down. And so kind of learning how we can work better within the tools we have, whether that's enforcement, education, physical infrastructure, technological infrastructure. And then I made another GIF of the Avalanche Stanley Cup Parade, because I think it's remarkable, at a day when it was nearly impossible to drive a car in and around downtown Denver, there were tens of thousands of trips happening by bike and scooter share. And right around that 11 a.m., 10 a.m., you see them all snap towards 17th and downtown. So cool to see these moving around. And with that, actually my last slide, which is some coming soon, and maybe I'll kind of quickly hit on these and dive into questions. But the biggest thing it's highlighted is our bike and ped infrastructure, what we've called bike lanes, but are now bike lanes, scooter lanes, one-wheel lanes, rollerblade lanes, like human lanes. We need more of them. We need them to be safer. So how do we build out, prioritize those? Station and corrals are a big piece of that. I think giving out those free pass programs, shouting from the rooftops that equity programs are there for folks and lock in that near free pricing, growing our fleets to get to that full citywide program. Anyone in any neighborhood has access to these vehicles within a few blocks. A lot of community events and education, been running those at least once a month in the summer and trying to do more, and then pairing that with the right level of enforcement where it makes sense. So with that, that is my presentation. I think I've probably gone a little over, so we'll defer to the group on how to handle questions, but yeah, thanks for the time.
Awesome. I see Paul's hand is up.
I just wanted, more than a question, I want to say, it's been too many years since Denver had an opportunity to party like that Stanley Cup Parade. And what were the estimates? There were 400,000 people downtown at the beginning of a work day in the middle of a week leading up to a holiday weekend. And, I know everyone from Department of Safety and Public Service to DOTI, there were a bunch of collaborations there, but I thought the whole thing went very, very smooth in the scheme of things. And I want to shout the DOTI people out who are on this call Because I know you had to whip that together fairly quickly. I'm sure there was a overreaching contingency plan, but you don't exactly wing an event of that size. So nicely done to everyone involved.
Glad to hear and seconded. It was fun to see that, having been at the Broncos one back in 2016. So another big celebration.
Thanks, Paul. Next up is Alan.
Stephen, again, thank you for this presentation. This has been really exciting to see. A couple different things. One, just want to give maybe a suggestion. We've noticed a lot of the lift and lime corrals that are being installed on the sidewalks, as opposed to, maybe in parking areas and things like that. So just wanted to maybe nudge consideration to have less obstruction for pedestrian areas where people are walking and using wheelchairs, and maybe more in on-street parking spots, as a comment. And then number two, just love seeing that it's expanding into areas that are traditionally in the inverted L in Denver from an equity perspective, and wanted to see where could we get more details about that so that we can promote with community for folks that do qualify, as you said, for those kind of federal or state financial aid, so we can spread that word amongst our different parts of Denver to those folks.
Yeah, so I'll, if I can, multitask here, drop the link in the chat, and if not, share it later. But on our city website, there is information on how to connect to those equity programs. It's basically you show one other type of aid that you're receiving to validate it, and then they use that as the validation. So I'm now dropping for everyone our website that has links to a lot of the things I've talked about, from the open data portal to the equity programs, to how to, what's the word I'm looking for, submit a violation yourself. To your initial question, it's actually a great one and something that I really harped on as we set up the program, that, as you likely know, historically, we price things for cars differently than people. That's just a challenge of the status quo we're dealing with. And we ran into, it was actually a lot easier, cheaper to cite these above the curb than below the curb. That was not what we wanted long-term for the reasons you cited. And so we set up a system where it roughly breaks down to a 50-50 split, that they're not allowed to have more than half of their stations above curb. They could over deploy them below curb and do 80% below curb if they wanted, but we sort of hit a threshold of, hey, you can't put any more of these above curb for exactly that reason. So always a balance, trying to thread the needle between getting these in where they can fit and go, while also not taking up pedestrian space. And it definitely was something that was important for the program. So appreciate you mentioning that.
Thank you.
And noted here, I was a little bit behind on the chat. There were a couple questions in the chat, but we'll ask Jake for his question first, and then we'll redirect to the chat.
Hi, Stephen. Thanks for coming to our meeting here. I'm really excited about the growth in mobility options that we have in the city, so definitely appreciate that. One thing I was curious about is the riding on the sidewalk issue is really seemingly, I'm operating pretty anecdotally, and I'm not even sure how we could really pull data on it, but it seems to be occurring at a much higher rate than ever before in this program. I actually live in a way that I can hear them on the sidewalk outside my building while I work all day. And I can assure you it's tripled since last year. I was just in Chicago this past weekend and was very impressed. They are, I think, 95% bikes. Their program is run by Lyft, but it's called Divvy. And they don't have any sidewalk riding from what I can tell as a system. So I was curious about options to basically explore looking at increasing that rate of bikes and encouraging more and more of this fleet to be bikes. We're basically at 2.5 ER visits to Denver Health alone every day for scooter riding, and not seeing the same for bicycles. So basically we're at a health crisis too, from hospital capacity from the scooter program. So would like to see if we can mix that share a little bit more to both reduce sidewalk riding, reduce injuries, reduce incidents of interactions. I ride the scooters a lot, and I'm sure I skew the ridership data because I'm looking for a bike and there aren't any. And so I think that some of the utilization data would be very different in the cities where there just are more bikes. So I'm curious if there's ways that we can play with the contract to potentially adjust that. So if we see in more incidences of scooter riding, we can say, hey, there is a fleet punishment, but the fleet punishment will allow you to migrate that shift to the bike. And I think that addresses a lot of those problems we're seeing, is we still offering a mobility option and not reducing that to citizens, but also reducing the pretty dramatic societal impacts that the scooters are having that the bikes maybe aren't at the same level.
Yes, I think a lot there. Maybe a few comments. Would initially just be curious to hear where you got those crash statistics. It tracks a little differently than I think what we found in our reporting. So it'd just be kind of curious to compare notes there offline. To your question about encouraging more bikes, that's a large part of why we set up the system the way we did, where scooters have a cap, but bikes have a floor. And so the operators can over deploy as many bikes as they want. They'll say people prefer the scooters, more folks are riding those more often, and we do want to, meet our customers where they are. But I believe it was Lime just this weekend rolled out their new bikes, and a pretty significant, over deployment beyond their requirement. And so I'm hopeful that they'll realize there's benefits of that. People do like the bikes. To your point, I think there's more of a just history of people knowing, like, you ride your bike in the bike lane. Unfortunately, right, the history of scooters, at one point you were supposed to ride them on the sidewalk. I think we're still dealing with some confusion from that, unfortunately. And then what it's highlighted for us is just that our infrastructure is not where folks want it to be on every street to feel safe. And so this challenge of, when ridership was lower, it was 1 or 2 bikes a day riding on a sidewalk. Those numbers I showed initially, the increase in ridership, it can be a high number of folks. But when there isn't a bike facility in the street, it creates this challenge of, where are folks going to ride? It's where they feel the most safe. While at the same time, DOTI prioritizing the pedestrian walking or rolling on the sidewalk above all else. So, I think a bit of a long way to say that it's highlighted we need to build our bike lanes and build them fast. We need to get out there using all the tools we have, but sort of encouraging that people are riding them, and we're seeing that growth, right? Double the growth from June last year is probably double the incidence of sidewalk riding that you're experiencing. But yeah, I think if you have suggestions, things we can do in the interim before getting to, a network where most of our streets have a bike lane that folks feel safe riding in, it's protected, separated. I think we're all ears, as we've been putting a lot of resources into keeping sidewalks safe, keeping people riding bikes and scooters safe from what might be happening in the street, and then letting folks driving to know to look for this transportation mode.
Thanks,
I'd
David.
also add one additional comment on the Chicago example, sort of being from there. Likely you don't see a lot of scooter and bike riding on sidewalks because it's actually against the law there, and it's a finable offense. And so a lot of the, particularly with their scooter program being a lot newer than Denver's, they've been working to really hard to really encourage people to use bike lanes and or streets to traverse for scooters and bikes. So I'd be happy to probably make a connection if y'all want to share best practices, if that's something that we obviously would want to explore, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. We should offline that. I think always copying notes from others in this space. So
right.
Right on. Well, I wanted to return to the chat here. Lucia, you had a couple of questions a little bit ago.
Yes. So my question is, I like to ride the scooters, and every time before I can end the ride, I have to take a picture of the scooter showing that it's parked properly. And, I'm a middle-aged woman, so I'm a rule follower. So I do that, but I kind of think, well, but I also see them parked terribly everywhere. And I'm wondering, how is it that they're taking pictures of it to end their ride, and it's obviously parked in a bad place? What's actually happening with that data? And then my second question was, are these companies profitable? And that's a good thing. I'm not anti-profit. I just want to know.
Yeah, I think the profit one, back of napkin math, they're doing pretty well for themselves in Denver. So I can say that the operations we have going here in Denver, self-sustaining, is it's things I glazed over in selection. Usually operators come and say, you know, we want three things. We want an exclusive contract, we want a long-term contract, and we want a subsidy. You know, Nick, others, and myself did the math and said, we think it can work on its own here, so we're not going to provide a subsidy. Makes sense with a longer term agreement. That's why they're 5 years. And we didn't want to go fully exclusive because we think, you know, having two operators having competition has really been beneficial for a number of reasons. You know, one puts out a new vehicle, the other one feels the need to, like, it's great to give Denver's residents some more competitive market there. But yeah, I think that's kind of the answer to your subsidy piece of it. To what happens with those photos, it's not something that the city has really engaged on yet. And one actually interesting anecdote is one other city in the Northwest, I'm forgetting which one, actually uses those to provide parking tickets to riders. And it's been quite interesting that they've found more often than not, the vehicle was parked correctly, but then someone came by and knocked it over, moved it, did something inappropriate. And so I think that's why we've just gone with, at least right now, it's less on the end user and trying to like penalize them or fine them, but knowing the operators are the ones who can profit from this program. They're the ones who, in my eyes, should be responsible for keeping it organized, having them on the hook to remedy the issues as they come. So there could be a future state where we think that's of value to plug into those. Just currently, it hasn't juice hasn't been worth the squeeze, is what we found in talking to other cities on that one.
I have one more quick question, if I could, and this is unrelated, regarding the geofencing. I remember hearing something in another city, it's being piloted, I think in California, that a scooter can tell when it's on a sidewalk versus on a street, you know, based on the times it hits a crack. Now, Denver's sidewalks are so bad, maybe that wouldn't work, but I was just curious if there's been any exploration of that here for Denver.
Yeah, so we've been calling all those cities in California, you know, other places where they've had some implementation of that sidewalk riding technology. And what we've heard is it's not quite there yet, right? So it's great, but it works 50% of the time, 40% of the time. And, you know, as we think of managing the safety of tens of thousands of people using these a day, how should we best thread that needle? And so what we've found, you know, one example actually in Colorado Springs is they went in, geofenced every single sidewalk. Great, there won't be sidewalk riding. What they found was, because of GPS drift and that technology, it would ding folks riding in the road, and it would actually cause a real safety issue when it would slow you down in front of a car inappropriately. So I think, right, it's this challenge of balancing safety for all users. And it's why we've really leaned into, we like to use technology as much as possible. We have our geofences around events, 16th Street Mall, using it for education and things like that, but really focusing on the infrastructure, giving people safe places to ride these on all the streets that they're riding them on, as rolling out technology that's 50-50 at scale is something that gives us pause at the city right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And so with that, we're at 5:51 now. Definitely over time. I know there's been a few more questions in the chat and a few others sent to us. Stephen, if you don't mind, I might pass those along by email to ask for the group and can share with the wider group here. We do have technically two more topics on our agenda today. That is the co-chair and secretary re-election for the remainder of term, and also odds and ends, where we just discuss other items not on the agenda. I don't think we're going to have time for our odds and ends today. I do want to prioritize these elections with our remaining time. And thus I'll also propose that we discuss next month's agenda, for which there have been a few suggestions from Jamie and Paul and others in chat and on the line today. We'll discuss that offline by email. Also want to balance that against our prioritized list we created last meeting to see what fits within line of DOTI's availability of speakers. So with these last 9 minutes, I think I'll move us over to our elections. Sorry I didn't pause there for a moment. Stephen, thank you so much for both presentations. I know we've been looking forward to this for a long time, so really appreciate that. And we'll send those follow-up questions along. So moving to our co-chair and secretary re-elections, for those new to the line, we have had a couple of board resignations that have opened up chair spot, co-chair and a secretary spot. This is only for the remainder of the 2022 term. So about half a year here. We'll then do a re-election in January of next year, perhaps December. I'm not sure which month it happens in, but in any case, for 2023. To move forward with these elections, we have 2 folks who have accepted nominations for secretary position and 2 for a board co-chair position. I am unfortunately just realizing in the very limited time we have, I thought I had prepared and did not actually prepare a voting form for this to send out to the group. Let's see, what can we do for a quick voting method? Just a second here. Oh, I think I can do this. Okay, let's see here. Just a moment. I thought I had this ready. And let's see here. Okay. And okay, great. So our 2 nominees for the co-chair position for the remainder of term are Jamie Lewis and Jay Cohen. And for the secretary position is Alan Cogill, and Paul Conzer. I do believe I have what we need for this. Duplicate form. Yes, all right, so I'll have a link for us in just a moment that I'll send out to the group here. And send a link. Here we are. All right, thanks. So for everyone, if you could look to the chat, I've just created a quick Google form for us to select here. We'll require your email entry and then your vote for each of these positions. We should have 9 votes today, given the number of folks on the line here. That'll give us the quorum we need for the remainder of term election. So I'll just give us a couple of minutes to fill that out. Pausing here, if anyone that is a board member cannot access this voting form or is having some difficulty, please just let me know and we can work out an alternate solution.
Jonathan, can I just clarify, we're supposed to vote for 1 member for the co-chair, correct? 1 of 2, correct?
Yes, did I? That should be a single select question.
No, that's okay. That's my stupidity for not following that more. But just in case there are other dumb people on here, I'm falling on the sword for them.
Yeah, okay. All right. Just waiting for a couple more responses here. And let's see, who are we missing? Oh, me. We're missing me. Okay. All right. That explains it. All right. All right. All right.
You count too, Jonathan.
Yeah. I guess my vote counts here. All right. Looks like I'll put into the notes, given our limited time, some of the counts for this and this form that I can share with the group. In a close race here, looks like we have Jake eking out over Jamie Lewis. So Jake, congratulations. You'll be another co-chair with me for the remainder of this term. And for the secretary position, we have Alan. So Alan Cogill, yeah, thank you for accepting the nomination. And we can make a transition for these elements in the next meeting. So thanks everyone for bearing with all of these elections we have had over the course of our first 6 months of this year. Hopefully this puts a stop to it for at least until January. And we've got a solid team here. 5:57 p.m. I think we won't have time to get into our next agenda items. I'm thinking with this short time, we should probably just adjourn a little bit early, address a follow-up agenda and questions after the meeting online. For the committees that did not get a chance to meet in June, please do try to carve out some time in the course of July before our August meeting. We don't want to fall behind on many of our activities. In the next agenda, we can assuredly hold a significant chunk of time for those committee updates to make sure that as a board, as a whole, we're making progress on the tasks we've committed ourselves to. Thank you for everyone on the line joining us today, and I hope you have a lovely rest of July.
Thanks,
Good job.
gentlemen.